Morning. It is Friday morning. I am so this morning I am wearing because President Jimmy Carter, former president, turned 100 a couple of years 100 years old a couple of days ago. I am wearing my re-elect Carter Mondale 1980 shirt, which makes me happy for a few different reasons. I love that it's a T-shirt from a losing campaign because it's a good reminder for me that sometimes. Losing campaigns are still worth fighting for. But happy birthday, Jimmy Carter. Extraordinary life. If you're interested in the shirt, by the way, I have no endorsement deal. Liberty Maniacs, I think, is where I got that. It is not a 1980 shirt per se, but it is the original design, and that makes me kind of happy. So this morning, I want to do, well, let's see, four things this Friday. We're now 2 weeks into this mad experiment of taking the Zeicast every day. Never too early to be self-referential on a podcast. But no, really, I did. I want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about what's been happening so far and where we're going. First of all, I'm just so grateful for any of you, all of you who are taking this journey with me. And it's a lot of content, but I'm having the time of my life, and so glad that we get to do this together, that we get to be on this journey together. So today, I wanted the flexibility to be able to talk about a few random things, and I wanted to start with a little piece. Became a little piece that I wrote the other night. Just felt like a thing I need to share from the day I had on Wednesday. And so if you'll indulge me, I'll read this to you quickly and then share just a few reflections. So for those who don't know, I serve as the director of the Center for Spiritual Life and associate Christian chaplain at DePaul University. And it's in so many ways, it's a remarkable gig. I get to do things that I deeply believe in. I get to do things that continue to deeply inspire and shape my own faith in all kinds of ways that I guess I just couldn't have anticipated, but I don't take for granted. And it's a lot. It's a lot of life. Our little family is spread out over 2 states, and I'm pastoring a Methodist church out in the country. And anybody would be right to question the sustainability of those things. And yet it continues to feel like there's so much grace on it. So the little piece I wrote just about the day I had on Wednesday, one of those days where it felt like this, just the stuff that was happening just needed to be documented somehow, if nothing else, just for me. Today, I drove to Indianapolis to pick up food for our Muslim students for their belated celebration of the Prophet's birthday tonight, and to Shapiro's Deli to pick up black and white cookies for Rosh Hashanah gift bags for our Jewish students to wish them well as they welcome the head of the year. While I was there, I ate a $21 Reuben that was worth every penny. And footnote, y'all, Shapiro's is for real. I have never had a Reuben like that outside New York City. It's honestly pretty life-changing. I bought a fresh loaf of bread at Kroger for a couple dollars, along with their house brand grape juice for a Christian chapel service. I held pieces of that same loaf in my hand, lifting it, then placing it in the hands of our students while I looked them eyeball to eyeball, and I said, "The body of Christ, broken for you." A local Hindu man, 60-ish, who's been in rural Indiana for 20 years since he left India, thin, maybe 5 feet tall, always smiling, came to the Center for Spiritual Life to use our Hindu room to pray, as he does sometimes when I'm around. He lives too far away from a temple. I was still holding the Eastern Orthodox cross I had out in the Christian chapel service in one hand and what was left of the body of Christ in the other. I put them down to hug him. He brought fresh fruit for our students as a show of gratitude for the opportunity to come, as he always does. He shook my hand 22 times, actually, and he hugged me 5 times. He picked up a copy of the blessing I wrote for parents a while back from the table in the lobby. He read the paper. His eyes got big, and he said, "You know, you did not write this. This is God. I am Hindu, and we worship many gods, but this is all God. When you write, it is not you. This is a gift. This is God speaking through you. It is all God. It is all from God. It's all about God. I felt an aw shucks response coming on, but deep down I thought, I know. So I just said thank you. Sitting down for the first time today after the event with our Muslim students, I wondered what words, what language I could possibly hang on such a day. Finally, I thought of exactly what to call it. It's Wednesday. All of that was just on Wednesday. Yeah, so I continue to have these really rich experiences. And part of what I love about what I get to do is that I can honestly say I have never felt more like a Christian in terms of the ways that I'm rooted and grounded in the particularity of my own faith and my own faith tradition than having the opportunity to serve my Hindu and Muslim and Buddhist and Jewish friends at the Center for Spiritual Life. Also, those that are agnostic, have no faith system. I've never felt more like a Christian. I've never felt deeper into the particularity of my own faith than being able to get lost in serving people that are outside of it. And I think the kind of education I get in that tonight. We are in the midst of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah literally means it doesn't technically mean New Year. It means the head of the year. We are welcoming the head of the year. That started on Wednesday, goes to today. Tonight, we'll be celebrating Shabbat. So we have our Shabbat service and dinner at the Center for Spiritual Life. My friend Rabbi Bruce Pfeffer will be here. I just could not overstate the kind of joy that it brings me. One of those things, coming up in the world that I did, that I talk about a lot and that I love and deeply appreciate, but from this very kind of sweaty Southern Pentecostal context, and getting to do all of this and finding in this journey the broadness of the Spirit, the mystery of God that just gets deeper for me. I understand, and I know a lot of you are in places, and I've been there where maybe in your own faith journey, there's disenchantment, there's disillusionment. I have so much empathy for that, and yet it's really not where I am. The world is very enchanted, and for all the things that are frightening and chaotic about the moment that we're living in, I feel like I'm just confronted day by day, almost moment by moment right now at the richness and the goodness of God and these really beautiful humans that I get to do life with. So even writing a piece like that, there's not an attempt to theologically name somehow what it all means. It's literally that's what I did on Wednesday. My sense right now, my friend Joel and I talk a lot about this, just this, I think local doesn't just matter. Local means everything. I truly believe that all hope is local, and being present to the life that we have, being present to the life that we've been given, being present to the people that we've been given. Last week, I did a little reflection on Frederick Buechner's phrase, to listen to your own life. That's always the task for me, is just listening to my own life. And I want to encourage you in that, because whatever context you're in, I'm quite certain you are also surrounded by this same kind of richness and diversity. But I think so often God just comes in forms. Surely God was here. Sure, the presence of God was here, but I did not know it. We mostly don't, unless we're paying attention. So I hope that this little time and space that we're taking is helping you to pay attention. I hope it's helping you to listen a little deeper to the sound of your own life and listen to the sound of God. Some of you know the sound of God is something I'm fond of talking about, and that's just getting worse or better. Because I do believe there is a sound of God. There is the sound that is tender in one way, but fierce in another. There is the sound that is wild. You know it when you hear it, and you know it when you don't hear it. And one of the things I loved about having Amy Hawk on this week to talk about some of the things that are happening politically. She, of course, wrote this great book, The Judas Effect, How Evangelicals Betrayed Jesus for Power. But being able to recognize when when we don't hear the sound. And I think is equally important sometimes, just walking in that kind of discernment. So I said I was giving you four things. I gave you the first, just a little bit of reflection on how I'm seeing God this week, my own sense of listening to the Spirit and where that has taken me, which thankfully involves possibly the best Reuben I've ever had. So you could be taken much worse places. I feel like the politics bit could be a bit of a segue here to our second. I didn't talk about the vice presidential debate this week, and I want to take just a moment to do that. Maybe the place of politics in general, what I'm doing here. I mean, I love that the broadness of the Zeicast, theology and culture, theology being defined as broadly as wherever and however we're finding meaning, and culture gets to be pretty much everything else. So there's a lot that we get to talk about. Politics certainly isn't everything, but it's one part of it. It's part of it sometimes. Part of the joy for me about being able to have some of the kind of conversations that we're having in this space right now, where, the other night, goodness, I really had not planned to do that. On a few minutes' notice, I decided I wanted to do a deep dive into Revelation. I think I took 20 minutes to outline some thoughts, and then got on here for an hour and 40 minutes, which I'm sure is drinking from a fire hydrant. But I love being able to go deep with some things like that, but then also to be able to pop on and just talk about what's happening in the world in some way. And as you got from the episode with Amy, part of that for me is that while and I really can't stress this enough, there is no sort of partisan angle here at all. Those of you who know me well know how true that is, because I'm so deeply disillusioned with neoliberalism. And I do feel like there's a very real way that politics are just so corporate in America. It's almost like it's like watching NASCAR. I am from North Carolina, but I do not generally watch NASCAR. Have been. My grandfather loved Richard Petty, and I have a great memory of going to the Richard Petty Museum. But NASCAR is generally not my thing. But it's like watching NASCAR insofar that it's everybody has these corporate logos, but the unfortunate thing is that they're not visible all the time. I think if we're aware of that, if we're aware of the corporate nature of our politics, there are so many deep reasons to be disillusioned in general. However, and this is a big caveat, I do feel like the Trump phenomenon, especially insofar as it pertains to the church, the fact that 81% have supported and white evangelicals and continue to support in the way they are, is not just a political crisis, but a theological one. And so I'm not shy about that. I'm not shy about saying that. I do think the imminent threat of fascism and authoritarianism and the kind of the ways that institutions and structures that actually are important for democracy are being dismantled is the more imminent threat. I think it's the most imminent threat. I'm not even going to do a thing right now about lesser of two evils or whatever. I think it is the most imminent threat. That's the language I feel most comfortable using. So, of course, I'm watching all these things with a great deal of curiosity, and I'm a student of rhetoric. I'm a person who appreciates rhetoric, so debates are always a bit of an event for me. Joel and Tosh had me over Tuesday night, and so we're watching all this together. I don't have a whole lot to say about the debate, except some of y'all know I do find J.D. Vance to be the most, not just unlikable. I feel like he's unlikable in kind of a remarkable way. It's like I don't know how a person could set out in public life to be that unlikable. It's kind of breathtaking. I think some of that has to do with just the sense of just how disingenuous, just how not authentic. You do get a sense with Vance often of not being comfortable in his own skin. I thought it was really fascinating watching the debate the other night between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, just how inverse they really are, almost the negative imprint of each other. Because what we've seen with Walz is that, I feel like he's really done well in big rooms behind a podium giving speeches, a lot better than Vance has. I thought Vance I did watch both conventions at length. I thought the Republican National Convention, I thought Vance also seemed stiff and stilted and formal. And always, I feel like the kind of disingenuous energy doesn't play well. So I feel like Walz has been better on the stump in that way, and Walz has clearly been better one-on-one. I feel like we just have quite the catalog now, don't we? Quite the library of awkward JD Vance moments, going into the donut shop, attempting to do human things, and it just coming off really poorly. But what we saw the other night is that, and this is what I say, they're the inverse. While Walz has been better behind the podium in big rooms, and he's been better one-on-one, JD Vance is an infinitely better debater. I did not think it was close in that way. In fact, I thought for about 96 minutes, he kind of took him to the woodshed. Clearly, Vance is that's more his ethos, more his environment. He was poised. Now, of course, the hilarity of all that is that I feel like the campaign is deeply maniacal. I mean, not just bad. I mean, the ideas are deeply maniacal. The level at this point of mischief that is in all the ways that Amy described the other day is kind of off the charts. But if you can give one credit for normalizing any of that and humanizing any of that, I think he did that as well as it could be done, and it was a significantly better debate performance. Tim Walz, I feel like always kind of appears earnest and sincere. It was interesting how much from everything I was able to watch and see, even stuff with undecideds. I have a lot of fun right now about undecideds. Who are these folks exactly? After all this time, who are still undecided? I won't give my full riff on that. I don't think. I don't know if that would be healthy. I have some funny thoughts about undecideds, but anyway, I think apparently Walz polled better with those folks than I would have anticipated. I do think there is a bit of an earnestness that's there. Also, some pretty significantly not great moments. I don't think the world is all that concerned about the China thing in terms of dates, but the fact that was a question that clearly was going to be coming. I would just think even a debate prep was there were really some real stinkers in terms of moments where he just wasn't comfortable and again, kind of not settled in his own skin. Whereas Vance seemed was in rhythm, was in flow, and however devious, I mean, it was a vastly better performance until roughly 96 minutes in, when asked the question about the 2020 election. I do think that's a significant moment. People are not here for it. People are not here for the election denial, and whatever goodwill he might have engendered, to whatever extent that any of what he had done and was doing was helpful for the campaign, I do think a lot of that evaporated in that moment. And at the end of the day, probably the vice presidential debate does not move the needle significantly for what happens in November. But yeah, I mean, again, as a student of rhetoric, I mean, debates for me are bigger than Super Bowls. So it's always fun to talk about it. Love to hear your comments. Love to hear your reflections. So please share this with me. But also, of course, part of what we do here is we talk about culture really broadly. So as my third thing, just a little bit of a drive-by to talk about TV and film, what I'm listening to, what I'm watching, what I'm hearing, what's inspiring me, what's moving me right now, what I find just simply worth checking out. And I got to tell you, at the top of the list right now, y'all, The Penguin, the new show on, I still want to say HBO. I suppose I'm supposed to say Max. We're 2 episodes in, and I got to tell you, I could not be more of a fan. There's a lot of fan service happening in the world right now, but for those of us who are comic book folks, the idea of there being a series, hopefully, of these kind of deep dive, deep cut Batman mythology spinoffs. Colin Farrell, who is unrecognizable in this role, and really, really good. I mean, it's kind of extraordinary performance. Everybody on the show has been so good. I love the dark, ominous take on the Penguin. I love doing the Penguin more kind of as the Godfather. And gosh, I just like the tone, the visuals, the storytelling. I just think it's off the charts. 2 weeks in, and I am hooked. Like just hook that up. I just want that show right in my veins right now. It's so good. The best thing I've seen for a while. I did consider actually last night as it opened. I almost went to go see Joker, Folio Do, the Joker sequel. I usually, for things that I know I want to watch, I don't. I try not to let reviews scare me off. I know it's about 40% right now on the tomato meter, and I like Todd Phillips, the director, more than not. But I already had some misgivings about it, so it's like I think I'm going to pass on that. Also, I'm trying to just kind of live my life here and not just do things like for the sake of content. So yeah, we'll see. What I did, I will say this much: what I did do last night instead, after a week that's been incredibly full, and I felt like I needed to do something to just decompress a bit, I did watch the new Salem's Lot movie, which is also on HBO/Max, also on Max. Initially, I had high hopes for the project. Some of you know I love Stephen King. Love Stephen King. I've read almost every Stephen King book. Actually, Salem's Lot I read not that long ago. I've kind of worked my way back through the catalog, so just got around to it sometime in the last couple of years. It's absolutely one of my favorites of his books. Even the TV miniseries adaptation, I think that came out roughly, is it 1979? Was it late 70s or early 80s? I wanted to say 79. But even the original made-for-TV Salem's Lot is shockingly creepy and effective and rewatchable. Been a few attempts at turning that into a small screen thing. There was a little miniseries with Rob Lowe, I think, that not turn out awesome. So anyway, I had high hopes, and I had high hopes partly because it seemed like they're at least real friendly with King and King's people, and so hoping that there'd be a bit more, direct creative oversight in that way. Got to tell you, the film is not great. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's pretty bad. The best thing I can say about it is that because I do kind of love all things Stephen King, and I do think Salem's Lot does a pretty effective job of just giving you the small town Maine feel that you want. There's just enough King directly in the translation, there like enough reverence for the source material to where I was able to enjoy some of it as a kind of comfort food, and kind of I was able to suspend my disbelief for a while in terms of realizing, okay, I don't think the acting is great. I don't think the script crackles. Don't think this is nearly as chilling as I want it to be. Just don't think this is quite coming together to be something that's greater than the sum of the parts. But it was a pretty good time mostly. By the end, by probably the last 20 minutes or so, I was really not feeling it. But I do think it was worth putting on. Still ultimately a disappointment though, and still waiting for that kind of definitive adaptation of Salem's Lot. This is not it. But, you could do worse things with, say, like a Saturday afternoon. Feels like a movie that you could put on like on Saturday afternoon, maybe while you're doing something else. The only thing I'll say right now, pop culture wise, I always kind of like when people, if I listen to a podcast, I'm curious what podcasts they like, what podcasts they listen to. Part of what's been interesting about my own journey with the Zeicast and podcasting in general, I started podcasting. Why does this feel like an old man talking right now? Really having no idea what it was. Back when I pastored in Charlotte, the sermons were, we would put those up via podcast, and it seemed to take on a life of its own in a way that was surprising. And I was kind of shocked at like, oh, people are really downloading this. This is a thing. It's interesting how much I've done this, and over the years, how long it was that I really wasn't listening to a lot of podcasts myself. Not like no shade in that way. It just wasn't kind of my primary medium. Whereas now I find myself, my life is very full and I'm on the move a lot, and having these voices, having these companions. I think of podcasts now, the further I go, a lot more like AM radio. I love the fact that there's a lot of long form content out there that you get connected to these voices that you feel like, yeah, it does feel like there's some way of kind of coming alongside them. I'm not a Joe Rogan fan personally, but it makes sense to me that they're going on sometimes an hour and a half a day or whatever. And just the familiarity you get when I listen to Bill Simmons' podcast, because I'm a big NBA guy, you get to know kind of the sense of this cast of characters, and there's a sense of camaraderie that's there. I will say a couple of the ones that I'm enjoying right now, maybe in the spirit of some of the things that we talked about politically. Really love the Bulwark podcast. Tim Miller, who of course ran Jeb Bush's campaigns. All of these guys kind of disenchanted Republicans. Bill Kristol, who was the chief of staff for Dan Quayle, one of the chief apologists for the Iraq War at the time, but deeply disillusioned with Trump and Trumpism. Sarah Longwell. I feel like the energy of that show is very authentic in a way that I really appreciate. So I enjoy some of the others. I do listen to Pod Save America some. Obama's former speechwriters, of course, do that. But I do feel like it's a little more mainstream. I like the Bulwark. I feel like it feels a little more uncensored, and a little more of a sense of like friends riffing on things that they just want to talk about. So that one's really working for me. Wonderful podcast right now called Know Your Enemy. That's a great podcast, guys who sort of kind of come from more left-leaning perspective, but deeply engage even classical conservative thought. And I think just the depth of analysis that's there is something that I crave in my life. So I think in terms of having deep conversations, I might even talk about some of this on here at some point. Stuff like, okay, so I've read René Girard extensively, the French literary critic who in turn did some really important work on theology. And we're finding Girard, who, by the way, I found more or less to be like really helpful in a lot of ways in my life, really instructive. And I think illuminating for a lot of things theologically. But we're seeing René Girard pop up more in these far right spaces. People like Peter Thiel, the billionaire who funds J.D. Vance, among with several other very conservative figures, but like it's been really shaped, it would seem, by a certain kind of reading of Girard, or is shaping Girard, depending on how you think about that. So I've been looking forever for like, surely somebody out there has done some kind of a deep dive with Peter Thiel and René Girard, and partly wondering if some of these instincts that I don't think are good, some of these darker instincts of reading Girard in a way where I don't mean this to be its own whole thing, but Girard, who does a lot of work on this idea of the scapegoat, and the idea of Girard's scapegoat mechanism kind of being turned into this whole sort of anti-woke propaganda. I just know what to make of that, and what of that is actually in the water with Girard, or what of this is more just the interpreters. Well, the Know Your Enemy podcast is the only source I was able to find that's really done a great like deep dive into Girard that takes him seriously theologically, but also kind of deals with some of the blind spots. So anyway, just great, really in-depth content there. I've been enjoying rediscovering Slow Burn. If you've ever listened to Slow Burn, I feel like Slow Burn came of age around the same time that the Serial podcast was a thing. This long form content, deep dive. I love the premise of going into a moment in history, just a moment in time, and then really going down the rabbit hole for, a couple of months. I loved it for a couple of years, and then I kind of lost track of it. They did a season on the Biggie and Tupac feud, which, by the way, I didn't think it was good at the time. I just had a lot of other things happening in my life, and somewhere around there ended up losing track. So I've been going back and listening to some of those episodes, and that's been a good time for me. Last couple of years, they did a whole retrospective on Clarence Thomas. Something about, especially some of these things that happened more in the 90s as I was still growing up and revisiting those things as an adult. I found that's been fascinating to me. So the Clarence Thomas stuff I thought was great. Did a deep dive into Roe v. Wade, just kind of dropping you into these moments in history. Sometimes I really do find some of that kind of work to be more helpful than anything that's happening in the present. That there really is a moment, a way that understanding these moments in history and thinking through them and being aware of them contextually makes the world come to life for me in ways now that where I feel like I'm able to make sense of things a little. So slow burn has definitely been on the radar. But that's just some of the stuff that I'm listening to. I did, though, by way of closing this thing out, I did want to land specifically with what's happening with this podcast and what's about to happen with it, the future of it, because I'm really excited. I know it's a lot of content. I know it's drinking from a fire hydrant right now, but it does feel like there's a lot of grace in this too, a lot of grace for me. And I'm glad that some of us who maybe have felt on the margins of our respective stories and places that we come from are finding each other in this space. And I'm really hopeful for the kind of community that I think we're going to be able to create. I appreciate you indulging my particular brand of madness. I mentioned, and it was interesting the other day, or I recorded that night, the other night when I did the Revelation deep dive for about an hour and 40 minutes. There was this way that, of course, I speak about this with real humility, because I don't know how that lands for anybody else. But as I was recording that, I really felt the thing happen to me that just happens as a person who still very much believes in the Holy Spirit and these ways that the Spirit just gets in the mix of our lives. It did feel like one of those things where I felt a little bit taken over. I still have reverence for those moments. I still try to yield in those moments. Part of how I've, in my own context, have come to know the sound of God and hear the sound of God. I know John Wesley would talk about how there was a unique sense of kind of a supernatural sense of God's hand and talking about God's mercy and God's grace, which I find always to be true. A lot of the imposters, a lot of the folks who I don't feel like are hearing the sound, and certainly not making the sound, don't do that. But they'll riff, and there'll be a lot of fire, but there's not warmth and there's not heat. But there is a way that I feel like sometimes that you're able to tap into something larger and to yield to that and to surrender to that in some ways. So it's been fun to have a few of those moments so far where it feels like really tapping into that thing and just spitting. And you guys have been great and kind to indulge me in that. But then also, again, to have these moments where we can just talk about what's happening in the world, what's happening in life, what's happening in culture. So want to continue to lean into that. And one of the things I think is going to be especially significant from this point forward, I have not announced this yet formally. On Instagram a while back, I asked folks, solicited your feedback as to what you would call a thing where I have loved what Nick Cave has been doing the last few years. Nick Cave, of course, rock singer, wrote a gorgeous book a couple years ago called Faith, Hope, and Carnage, about his own experience of grief and his own way of processing grief. Cannot recommend it more highly. But Nick Cave does this thing, the Red Hand Files, where fans submit letters, and at least once a week he answers one of those letters. And I've been inspired by it. It feels kind of like Apostle Paul for our time. Even the idea of just sitting down to physically respond to a letter. It's really a beautiful phenomenon. So being directly inspired by that, but wanting to be able to do it in a slightly more overtly theological way. Also, as I'm shooting this morning, I've got my typewriter right here. It is a beast, this 1982 Selectric. But I love the idea of being able even to type responses and to send real letters in the mail. So we threw that on Instagram. We asked for titles. On Instagram, I'm going to honor and celebrate the folks who gave this, because actually I think 2 people proposed a version of this. But we're going to be developing this segment that we're calling the Typecast. The Typecast is kind of a subset of the Zeicast, and the Typecast specifically where you write me letters and I respond to them physically in real life in the mail. For those of you that feel comfortable, and we'll always ask that. Sometimes we'll be talking about some of those answers here. Sometimes we'll talk about some of those responses in this space. So be looking for more about that. We're going to mostly channel the questions through my website, jonathanmartinwords.com. In the meantime, probably through Instagram, we might solicit the first round of questions here in the next couple of days. But I did want you to know that the Typecast is coming and how excited I am to be able to engage your questions at length. As an ADHD person, I do not always do the best with communication because I easily get overwhelmed. And this just feels like a great container for that, get the questions, respond to the questions in depth, both in print and riffing a little bit here, and letting you shape this, letting you drive this. I think there's something really wonderful about that, about this podcast becoming a way that you get to choose your own adventure. I know that nothing lights me up like when I feel like whatever this thing is that I do is really used somehow in service for people, that it's actually helping folks, speaking into your real lives in some way. It's really what I want to do. It's a gift to be able to do that. It's a humbling thing that I take very seriously. So yeah, Typecast is coming. Let me know what you think. And if you want to, in those comments, if you want to put down a question already, like, go for it. Cause I'm really looking forward to the first round, and do kind of feel like, let's go, let's do this. Zeicast, Typecast. Love the idea of you as listeners, watchers, friends being able to drive and dictate a lot of this content. Yeah, there's something that feels really spirit led to me about that, and really beautiful. I like the idea of, I always am trying to find ways to let my own hands off the steering wheel. I just so believe in that kind of surrender. So whatever questions are stirring up in you, I'm going to trust that that is going to be a thing that leads me in some ways. And it will be an honor to be able to do that. For those of you who watch on YouTube, please feel free to like, subscribe, all the things, any way that you're able to share this podcast, review it, all of that stuff, of course, is helpful. Once again, I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be able to come alongside in some way. So that is the end of my little 4 things for Friday. Did it turn to 5 things for Friday? Maybe it's 5. I don't know. It's Friday morning. It's Friday, y'all. We'll play some basketball here in a couple hours. Have some Shabbat time. It's going to be good. Hope you know that you are loved. I hope you feel seen and known today. We've got some great guests coming. I mean, some really great guests coming. Not going to tease that out too far, but I will see you right back in this space Monday morning, 8 a.m. on YouTube, audio podcast immediately to follow, as always. Thanks so much, friends. Hope that you have a great weekend. So good to see you all.